It is linen, 14 feet long, 3.5 feet wide, ivory-colored with age, bearing faint brown discolorations across its surface that, at first glance, seem like nothing at all. Then you look again. The discolorations resolve into a shape, a human shape, front and back, head to head, as if a body were laid upon one half of the cloth and the other half folded over it. A man, tall, long-haired, bearded, arms crossed at the wrist over the lower abdomen, and then the wounds. Rivulets at the crown of the head consistent with punctures from thorns. Marks at the wrists and feet consistent with nails driven through bone. A long elliptical wound on the right side of the chest consistent with a spear. Lash marks, more than 100 of them, across the back and shoulders, matching the pattern produced by a Roman flagrum, the multi-thonged whip used in judicial flogging. The wounds correspond detail by detail to the gospel account of the crucifixion of Jesus of Nazareth. No paint has ever been found on this cloth. No dye. No pigment of any kind in sufficient quantity to explain the image. No confirmed artistic technique has ever been demonstrated to replicate it to the satisfaction of all researchers who have examined it. And no laboratory in the world has yet produced a complete, verified explanation of how the image was formed. This is the Shroud of Turin, and the question it poses has not been answered. This is Bible Stories Unearthed, where we retell the narratives of Scripture alongside the history, archaeology, and ancient world that give them their full weight. Today, the cloth preserved in Turin Cathedral that may be the burial linen of Jesus of Nazareth, what science has established, what it has not, and why the question remains genuinely contested. To understand what the shroud is claimed to be, it helps to understand what first-century Jewish burial practice actually looked like. Jewish law in the Second Temple period, the era in which Jesus lived, required burial to take place as quickly as possible after death, ideally before sundown on the day of death. The body was washed, anointed with aromatic oils and spices, and wrapped in linen. The wrapping could take several forms: simple linen strips wound around the limbs, a full burial shroud, a single sheet folded over the body. The Gospels describe both. John's account mentions strips of linen along with a separate cloth that had been around Jesus' head, while the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, each use the Greek word syndon, meaning a single large linen cloth, to describe what Joseph of Arimathea used to wrap the body. The tomb into which Jesus was placed was a rock-cut tomb, the standard burial form for a person of at least modest means in first-century Jerusalem. A low entrance, a stone rolled across it to seal it. Inside, a carved ledge or shelf on which the body would lie. Whether a burial cloth survived from that tomb and whether the cloth now in Turin is that cloth, that is the question this episode examines. The documented history of the shroud begins in France, in the village of Lire, in approximately 1355 AD. A French knight named Geoffroy de Charny, a man well regarded in his era, later killed at the Battle of Poitiers, placed a linen cloth bearing the image of a crucified man on display in a collegiate church he had founded. Pilgrims came. Lire became, briefly, a site of veneration. The local bishop, Henri de Poitiers, was not convinced. He investigated and reportedly concluded the cloth was a forgery, though his written findings have not survived. The display was suspended. It resumed some decades later under Geoffroy's granddaughter, Marguerite de Charny. In 1389, a later bishop of the diocese, Pierre d'Arcey, wrote a memorandum to Pope Clement VII that has survived and is one of the earliest and most important documents in the shroud's history. D'Arcey claimed that his predecessor de Poitiers had discovered the image was painted and had even identified the artist, but D'Arcey named no artist. No confirmed painting has ever been found, and his memorandum was written in the context of a bitter jurisdictional dispute over whether the Lire Church had the authority to display the cloth at all. It is a hostile document, produced under specific political pressure, not a dispassionate investigation. Whatever its origins, the cloth passed, through Marguerite de Charny's gift to the House of Savoy in 1453, across Europe, surviving a fire in 1532 that left scorch marks and water stains still visible today, and arrived eventually in Turin, where the Savoy family settled. In 1578, it was transferred to Turin Cathedral, where it has remained, with the exception of wartime removals for safekeeping. In 1898, a lawyer and amateur photographer named Secondo Pia was given permission to photograph the shroud during a public exhibition. When he developed his glass photographic plate, he saw something that stopped him cold. The negative, which should have produced a reversed, darkened image, instead revealed a positive image of striking clarity, a face, with depth, shadow, and anatomical detail not visible to the naked eye on the cloth itself. The image on the cloth, Pia realized, behaved like a photographic negative, which meant the cloth itself was, in some sense, a positive. It was a discovery that neither medieval artistry nor any existing theological claim had anticipated, and it launched the modern era of scientific investigation. In 1978, a team of 40 American scientists, physicists, chemists, thermodynamicists, image analysts, and medical professionals gained unprecedented access to the shroud for 5 days of intensive examination. This group, the Shroud of Turin Research Project, known as STURP, brought the most advanced analytical equipment available at the time. Their conclusions, published across peer-reviewed journals over the following years, were careful and specific. The image was not produced by any paint, pigment, dye, or coating they could identify. There was no capillary flow, the spreading of liquid that occurs when paint or ink is applied wet. The image resided only in the outermost fibrils, the individual surface fibers of each thread, penetrating no deeper. Researchers John Heller and Alan Adler identified chemical components consistent with the presence of blood, including porphyrins and bilirubin, though subsequent claims about specific blood typing from this degraded ancient material remain highly contested among forensic scientists. STURP did not conclude the shroud was authentic. They were explicit about that. What they concluded was that the image formation mechanism was, as of their investigation, unexplained. The 1988 radiocarbon test was supposed to settle the matter. By the mid-1980s, the Vatican had agreed to allow small samples of the cloth to be removed and submitted to radiocarbon dating, a technique that measures the decay of carbon isotopes in organic material to establish when a plant or animal was alive. 3 independent laboratories were chosen, in Oxford, Zurich, and Tucson. The test was among the most publicly anticipated scientific events of that decade. The samples were cut from a corner of the cloth in April 1988. The results, published in Nature in 1989 under lead author P.E. Damon, were consistent across all three labs. The linen dated to between 1260 and 1390 A.D. medieval. The authors concluded the shroud was not the burial cloth of Jesus of Nazareth. The coverage was global. For many, the case was closed, but the scientific exchange that followed was not. In 2005, Raymond Rogers, a physical chemist who had been part of the original STURP team, published a peer-reviewed paper in Thermochimica Acta with findings he had not expected to reach. Rogers examined threads from the corner of the shroud from which the radiocarbon samples had been taken and compared them to threads from the main body of the cloth. He found the corner threads contained vanillin, a chemical compound present in linen that degrades predictably over time. The main body of the shroud contained no detectable vanillin. Based on the rate of vanillin degradation, Rogers estimated the main cloth was substantially older than the radiocarbon result indicated, at minimum 1,300 years old. He also identified material differences in the corner threads consistent, he argued, with a medieval repair incorporating different fiber. His interpretation, the radiocarbon sample had been taken from a repaired or reweaved section of the shroud, not from the original cloth. If correct, the 1988 dating result would reflect the date of a patch, not the age of the linen beneath it. Rogers's paper was peer-reviewed and published in a credible chemistry journal. It was also directly challenged. In 2010, A.J. Timothy Jull, one of the scientists involved in the original 1988 dating, and Rachel Freer-Waters published a peer-reviewed microscopic analysis of the retained sample material from 1988. Examining the fibers directly, they concluded the samples were standard linen, structurally consistent with the rest of the shroud, and found no evidence of a medieval patch, splice, or cotton linen reweave of the kind Rogers had described. The radiocarbon community's response to the reweaving hypothesis has, on balance, been to reject it. Rogers's vanillin findings, and what they may indicate about the cloth's age independent of the corner section, remain less thoroughly addressed in the literature. The image formation problem has proven equally resistant to resolution. Multiple mechanisms have been proposed over the decades. In 2009, Italian chemist Luigi Garlascelli demonstrated that a full-scale image with some of the shroud's characteristic properties, including the negative image quality and a degree of three-dimensional encoding, could be produced using materials and techniques available in the Middle Ages, rubbing acidic pigment over a bas-relief figure and chemically degrading the surface fibers. Authenticist researchers have challenged his results on specific technical grounds, arguing the microscopic fibril-level penetration STURP documented was not replicated. The dispute over what constitutes a sufficient replication has not been resolved to the satisfaction of all parties. No proposed mechanism, naturalistic or otherwise, has achieved the status of confirmed explanation. The honest state of the shroud question, as the evidence currently stands, is this: the cloth exists. The image exists. The wounds are anatomically consistent with the Roman crucifixion described in the Gospels, and notably consistent with details that medieval European artistic convention consistently rendered incorrectly. Medieval painters placed the nails in the palms. The shroud shows them at the wrists, which is where modern biomechanical analysis places them in a functioning crucifixion. Whether this reflects historical accuracy in the image's origin or exceptional anatomical knowledge on the part of a medieval creator is part of what makes the object difficult to dismiss simply. The radiocarbon dating result of 1260 to 1390 AD is a documented scientific finding from 3 independent laboratories published in Nature and represents the most direct empirical test the cloth has undergone. The radiocarbon community's response to challenges of that result, including the Joule and Freer-Waters microscopic analysis, has been to reaffirm it. At the same time, Rogers's vanillin work raises questions about the chemical profile of the sampled corner that have not been fully answered in the published literature. Botanical studies by Avinoam Danin and Uri Baruch, published in peer-reviewed literature in 2000, identified plant species on the shroud consistent with a spring flowering in the Jerusalem region. The scope of the conclusions that can be drawn from that pollen evidence, and Baruch's own subsequent caution about what the data supports, means it should be treated as suggestive rather than diagnostic. The image formation mechanism remains, formally, unexplained to unanimous scientific satisfaction. That is not a faith claim. It is an accurate description of where the scientific literature currently stands. What the Shroud of Turin preserves, regardless of what it ultimately is the seriousness of the question it forces. For well over a century, scientists, historians, and forensic specialists have brought every tool available to a single piece of linen, and the linen has not yielded a clean answer. The radiocarbon result is real. So is the image formation problem. So is the dispute over the sample's representativeness. These are not positions held by opposing camps of believers and non-believers. They are positions held by credentialed scientists in peer-reviewed journals who have examined the same evidence and reached different conclusions about what it means. What the cloth demands is something harder than certainty. It demands the willingness to sit with a question that empirical investigation has narrowed but not closed. To look at a 14-foot length of linen bearing the image of a wounded man, and acknowledge that we do not yet have a complete account of what we are looking at. That unresolved remainder, after more than a century of the most sophisticated testing available, may itself be the most telling thing about the shroud. Thank you for being here. This story has been told. Subscribe and return to Bible Stories Unearthed. The book is open. Let's unearth more.